We light the chalice, a symbol of our faith and community, with responsive reading number 519 by Rabindranath Tagore, which can be found in your gray hymnal, number 519. I'll read the parts in plain type and would ask that you read the parts in italics. Let me not pray to be sheltered from dangers,
but to be fearless in facing them.
Let me not beg for the stilling of my pain,
but for the heart to conquer it.
Let me not look for allies in life's battlefield,
but to my own strength.
Let me not crave in anxious fear to be saved,
but hope for patience to win my freedom.
Grant me that I may not be a coward, feeling your mercy in my success alone.
But let me find the grasp of your hand in my failure.
And this morning, for our worship theme, we are exploring suffering. So I just want to say a few things before we go into a meditation setting this up. The Buddha lived approximately 2,500 years ago. And the study of Buddhism begins with looking at the foundational framework, which the Buddha called the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth is often translated in English to be life is suffering. And some Buddhist teachers say that an additional modern translation might include life is stress. So life involves suffering and stress, and that's a truth. Last week we celebrated Easter, Good Friday. 3 days before there is the marking of the death and the mourning of the death of Jesus. To get to resurrection, you have to die or suffer. So today you could say we're, with deep respect, inverting the Good Friday Easter order as a way of honoring the cycles of suffering and rising again with hope. Out of despair, suffering, rising again. Similar to the way we honored it last night with the Seder. The honoring of the journey out of the bondage of oppression towards freedom. So as a practice for acknowledging the reality of suffering and stress, which nobody can escape, in the journey from birth to death, the Buddha had this practice. Five Remembrances. And it's a way of bringing your heart towards some realities that, whether we're conscious of wanting to deal with it or not, we have to find ways to be with these truths. So I'm going to invite these out. I invite you into a time of meditation now. Perhaps you want to mindfully connect with your breath. Intentionally breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. And I'll give these words from the Buddha with some space in between for you to hold them in your heart. I am of the nature to grow old. I cannot escape old age. I am of the nature to have ill health. I cannot escape ill health. I am of the nature to die. I cannot escape dying. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There's no way to escape being separated from them. I cannot keep anything. I come here empty-handed, and I leave here empty-handed. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground on which I stand. I invite you to hold in your heart the power of this moment, the power of connecting with your breath, the power of the beautiful reality that your actions of loving kindness can bring great strength. With breath, spirit of life, and beloved community, may our loving kindness increase love, courage, and hope to live as we encounter life. Frank shares with a group of companions, I have colon cancer. I've had surgery, I've been through radiation and chemo, and something is still not right with me. I know it, I feel stuck, kind of numb. Everyone in my family feels it too. I want to live differently, somehow with more appreciation. You may have cancer. You may be HIV positive. You may have high blood pressure. You may be overcoming a heart attack. Your child may be struggling with learning disabilities. You may be addicted to pornography. You may be fighting with your spouse. Our third Unitarian Universalist principle is the acceptance of one another and the encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. How do we live out the third principle in the context of suffering? The first healthy step, many of us know, in dealing with suffering involves acceptance. Acceptance of what is. Now, socialization often leads us to believe that we should be happy, chipper, and carefree all the time, or there's something wrong with us. I often tune into this with the beer commercials during the games. So, you know that party, like every year the TV commercials make the party look better and better. And everybody's just flowing into the party. It looks like they have these parties like 3 times a week. And I'm thinking, my life is not like that. Whether I drink or not, and it makes me think, something's wrong with me if I'm not having that much fun. Well, that is simply not true. And feelings of darkness and sadness are intrinsic to being human. Growing up Unitarian Universalist in a radical left-wing church on the west side of Chicago, I adamantly rejected acceptance as a valuable spiritual idea. I would not have been preaching on this topic when I was 22. Catholic bishops in Latin America regularly taught the campesinos to accept their poverty and their systematic oppression as part of God's plan, and I wanted nothing to do with that oppressive theology. Dr. King would be appalled if we just focused on acceptance. What would have happened to the civil rights movement? Let's just accept everything as it is. No, that's not what Dr. King said. And over time, I came to, for me, new understandings and deeper appreciation for me of the power of letting go of the things I cannot control. Now, it's tough to know what we can and cannot have an impact on. And it's certainly true that we can, and I would say must, still engage in disciplined efforts to dismantle oppression and know that we can make a difference. As we read last night at our Seder from the Haggadah, if the world hears the cries of the oppressed but does not come to their aid, it will not be enough. But it's also true that surrender has its place in the constellation of healthy spirituality. I can't believe that if you asked me at the age of 20, would I be saying this at the age of 50 in the pulpit, I would have said, you're crazy. But it's absolutely true that some of the periods in my life when I have experienced the most profound happiness have come directly from the serenity of accepting the things I cannot change. I have gone days, I can testify to you, some cases weeks, when the answer to any quandary I was facing, including suffering in my heart, was letting go. Whether a small thing or a big thing, I just had to say to myself, Kent, surrender. Stop thinking about it. Stop trying to control it. Through surrender, I have felt lighter and more able to appreciate life for what life is. This is a really interesting place to look at the difference between religious traditions and spiritual traditions. Many of them come at this from saying, turn things over to God and to life. And that can be valuable. If you suffer from addiction or chronic pain, you may benefit from accepting the things you cannot change and letting go. There are also a little bit different tweaks on the frame that you can engage. A spiritual practice connecting with the divine in you and around you can be turning over your attention or your way of being to that spiritual practice like we engaged in today. I think that could be analogous for an atheist or an agnostic of turning it over to life. Do a little qigong. The wisdom of surrender can help with diminished libido, empty nest syndrome, younger people coming into your work environment who are faster and technologically more savvy. For those past the midpoint of life, you might surrender to the fact that there are mountains you're not going to climb, things you're not going to do. That amazing peak job of your career that you always thought you were headed to might not be on the path. You might not have the relationship you always thought you wanted or deserved. You might not live in the location that you always dreamed was in the film you wrote and directed and starred in for yourself. Ultimately, we all must surrender to the fact that we cannot change the past. Not many people I know. Can Harry Potter change the past? Maybe Harry can, but if you're in a painful cycle of asking, what should I have been? What should I have been career-wise or role in the community? What could I have done differently? Why did I marry this person? Why am I single? Blah, blah, blah. Might be good to let go more. In the midst of suffering, another helpful practice is simply engaging loving kindness with yourself and others. You deserve loving kindness. You are called to embody loving kindness to other sentient beings. It's a tangible practice which can break us out of cycles of suffering. Too often, people in our church feel that they're being treated unkindly. Too often, people of color in our church feel they're being treated unkindly within the context of simply being a person of color. And we can do better than that. We can break the pattern with loving kindness, which is a practice that can also lead to effective breaking down of systems of oppression. But you start one interaction at a time, including with yourself, including with your neighbor. Then we figure out how to support Robert Mueller with loving kindness. But you got to start local, people. I'm saying you can't just focus. You can't just focus on Robert Mueller all day. You're not on his team, even though you want to be. It's not. No. You got to be kind to yourself and your beautiful, amazing wife. Oh, I think I just said something. Another practice for engaging suffering is be creative. Thomas More served for 12 years as a Catholic monk in a religious order. Now he's more well known as a writer. More wrote a book which many are familiar with, entitled Care of the Soul. And one of the sections is entitled Gifts of Depression. Gifts of Depression. In the chapter, Moore talks not only about accepting the blues as a normal part of life, but he also boldly claims that we can make a friend of depression. Now, it's critical to emphasize here that any kind of mental health problems or mental illness often need and deserve attention, including counseling or medicine. We're blessed that there are many amazing medicines these days, and the goal should be to reduce and manage symptoms, which sadly millions of people go untreated with in our country. The religious community can play a critical role in attacking the social stigma and helping to provide health care for all in a nation doing better than we are now. But it's also true that people have been coping with mild forms of sadness and loneliness in constructive ways for millennia. Moore writes, there was a time 500 or 600 years ago when melancholy was identified with the Roman god Saturn, the old man god. And a person chronically disposed to melancholy was known as a child of Saturn. And this is where you hear talking about the golden years and the good old days. In that context, it meant visiting with the god Saturn, engaging melancholy with the divine. With this approach, we can engage suffering while we acknowledge our bodies are getting older, not doing the same stuff we want them to do. This is how we can approach dealing with hard memories and approaching death. Visiting emotions involving suffering can help us interact more with sacred energy that we shut off with just that chipper, happy-go-lucky thing all the time. Louis Armstrong sang, I got the blues so bad one time it put my face in a permanent frown. What if the blues were simply a state of being, neither good nor bad, something the soul does on its own good time for its own good reasons? We don't always know why. This approach allows us to let go of that ego, a little bit more detached from the ego, acknowledge it's okay to be sad and down. This lesson is harder sometimes for men. I'm a tough guy. I do my yoga. I shouldn't get down. I'm a tough guy. Well, guess what? You do get down, Kent. Increasingly, women have the same kind of challenges. It's good to learn. It's okay to cry. Sometimes it's great to cry. The nurse in the hospital often says, better out than in, physically. Same is true with the emotions. Why keep it in? sometimes. Let it out. It's better. Get it out in the sunshine. Get it out in beloved community. Suffering can be a catalyst, which turns us towards something better. A man I know put it this way. He said, about 11 years ago, I got a divorce, and that turned out to be the best, worst thing that ever happened to me. He said he and his wife went through gut-wrenching suffering, trying to find a way, especially because they had children. They tried every angle they could to make the marriage work, but eventually they just realized they had to let go, wish each other blessings, and say goodbye. And he says, looking back now on his divorce, it created some of the best circumstances possible for this a wonderful new chapter of his life he's in. Personally, I do not embrace a theology of everything happens for a reason, or that God has a master plan for everything. I just don't believe in that for many reasons, including innocent people suffer, there's enough food, but people are hungry. At times, one door closes and another door opens, but even that is not always true. When suffering closes one door, though, we can almost always cultivate some kind of gratitude for opportunities that do exist and an energy to go and take advantage of those opportunities. You can chart this possibly by suffering is pain. That can be a catalyst. Maybe you've seen it in your life. If you do this exercise, draw a line, put your birth date here and today here, and chart the times that have made you most of who you are. What are the events or circumstances that have made you who you are? Reflecting on your graph, you're likely to note the spikes in pain or suffering have a relationship to your leaps in growth. Maybe it was when your family moved for the 4th time in 5 years that you learned finally how to enjoy your own company. Maybe it was when your partner left you that you remembered what else you were meant to do in your life beyond being together. It was when the doctor called about that spot on your lung that you finally made up with your sister. These were not always the ways in which you would have chosen to become who you are, but they worked. Some say, interesting discussion, Unitarian Universalists have less motivation to do well because we do not believe in hell. We don't have anything to worry about. It is true. Let's talk about that one more often, people, in coffee hour. Everybody talk about it. Are we less motivated if you don't believe in hell in the literal afterlife? It is true that many of us do not fear punishment of hell in the afterlife. I do not. I do not believe in hell in the afterlife. But I'll tell you with every fiber of my being that we all know for sure that plenty of hell exists in the world. Massive amounts of pain and suffering and lack of fairness exist in this world. The reality is we have breakdowns. People get sick and lose their ability to do what they love. They lose their ability to make ends meet. Jobs implode. Women's physical and emotional boundaries are violated. Relationships fall apart. And we must declare that at times life is very unfair. They have to figure out how to deal with that suffering and the reality in which we live. In this moment, I invite you to give thanks for the chance you have to change some hell into heaven. Give thanks for the life you do have, even if it has lots of suffering. Feel that desire to give back to the world with goodness from you. Here in Beloved Community, I invite you to give thanks for the best, worst things that helped you to be who you are. want what you have and do what you can. Blessings be. Amen. From Thomas More. Care of the soul is not solving the puzzle of life, quite the opposite. It's an appreciation of the paradoxical mysteries that blend light and darkness into the grandeur of what human life and culture can be.
May